What would you say is the most important journey that you ever have to take? Is it that one from birth, when you have spent your first few days in the world? Is it perhaps your first day at school? Is it your journey into adulthood, new relationships, a new career perhaps? But there is one journey that we all have to take regardless, and it's a journey that we cannot take alone. We have to leave it into the entrusted care of the loved ones that we leave behind. It is this slow passage from this world and whatever is here to whatever lies next. Now, for the Victorians, this journey could be done in style, exquisite detail, and by rail. Now, this is the story of the London Necropolis Company and the line that was built solely for the dead. Close your eyes, if you will, and imagine this. It's a grey November morning in 1865. Fog rolls low over the Thames, curling around the gas lamps as your carriage clatters through the narrow streets near Waterloo. You're here to say goodbye, but instead of heading to a church, you arrive at a grand, sombre station on Westminster Bridge Road, the London Necropolis Terminus, a station not for commuters, but for coffins. A uniformed porter takes the ticket from your hand. 6 shillings if you can afford first class, 2 shillings for the cheapest seat. The deceased has a ticket too, a one-way fare, nailed discreetly to the coffin lid. You step inside. The air smells faintly of varnish and coal smoke. Private waiting rooms for each class are lined with polished wood and heavy drapes. Even in death, the Victorians insisted on knowing their place. Through the window you see a separate entrance where nonconformists gather. Anglicans will board at the other end of the train. Even here faith divides the living and the dead. A bell rings, doors slam, the locomotive shrieks into the mist. You take your seat as somewhere behind you, in a coffin wagon draped in black cloth, your loved one begins their final journey. Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Claire and this is The Wanderlust Way. Firstly, let me say a huge thank you to everybody that supports this channel by liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing, becoming members, sending super thanks. Honestly, everything that you do helps this channel to grow, and it allows me to continue with these adventures and share the stories that I find with you at these places that I discover. Okay, so today we are stepping into the Victorian world of the funeral, and we are going on quite a morbid journey. However, it is perhaps one that our ancestors may have taken during those Victorian times through the Surrey countryside for a day out like never before. It might make you shudder, but it did happen. So if that sounds like the sort of adventure that you're ready to join me on today, please take off your hats, pay a solemn nod to the passing carriage, and join me as we join the Necropolis Railway funeral train. That's enough waffle, let's wander. By the middle of the 19th century, London was rotting from within. The city's living population had more than doubled in just 50 years, from just under 1 million souls in 1801 to over 2.25 million by 1851. The dead, however, had nowhere to go. Churchyards and burial grounds overflowed. The sanctity of graves was a polite fiction. Plots were dug up again and again. Old coffins splintered, remains scattered carelessly over the soil. Some grave pits were dug so deep and so wide they swallowed hundreds of bodies at a time. Bones were burned or sold for profit, coffin handles stripped for the second-hand trade, and scraps of coffin wood carted away to feed the fires of the poor. Even in death, Londoners were commodities. Many tons of human bone left the city each year, sent north to be crushed and scattered over farmland as fertiliser. And all the while, the living feared the threat of disease, seeping from overcrowded graveyards into their homes and water supply. It was a problem too large for half measures, and in the winter of 1849, two men, Sir Richard Brown and Richard Spire, proposed a radical solution. Their vision was for a single cemetery, so vast it could take every one of London's dead for centuries to come, far from the capital, beyond any possible future expansion of the city, in the Surrey heathlands near the village of Woking. Here, fresh air and open land would ensure public health was never threatened. And here, amid heather, rhododendrons and woodland, the dead could rest in peace. The London Necropolis and National Mausoleum Company was incorporated by a private Act of Parliament, receiving royal assent on the 30th of June 1852. The London and South Western Railway was written directly into the Act, its lines essential to the scheme.
Braun believed that the most convenient departure point would be Waterloo.
Waterloo, he said, was a central location where a dedicated terminus could be built, shielding mourners from the gaze of the public. From here, a 40-minute railway journey would carry the dead and their companions directly into the cemetery grounds. The first stage of the cemetery opened in November 1854, covering 500 acres. In an 1899 company brochure, it was proudly described as the largest in England, the most complete in all its arrangements, an ideal burial ground.
And indeed, the landscape at Brookwood was designed to soothe the mourners. You've got avenues of trees, you've got beautiful light that's peeping through, heather on the ground. It's really a beautiful, tranquil place even today. As cemeteries go, it's really, really lovely. And I think they've just nailed this one.
When I first heard about this story, it was not the first time I'd heard of such grand burial schemes. If you've seen my video on Highgate Cemetery, you'll know the Victorians loved their dead almost as much as they loved their railways. But never before had the two been so perfectly and so morbidly combined. And so the great solution took shape, a station built not for the living, but for those whose journeys were nearly done. Its gates would be the threshold between London and eternity. In 1854, at the southern end of Westminster Bridge Road, a most unusual station opened its doors.
Well then, do we know what this is? Well, I'm going to tell you if you don't know. This was once the home of the London Necropolis Railway Company. So through this very archway that we are over, the mourners, the coffins, everybody would have come. You can't get in now, unfortunately, so we can't show you much, and a lot of it has been demolished. But if we peek through here, have a little peek through, you can see the ticket office. You can see the ticket office window, so that's where the people would have got their tickets, obviously for both themselves and for the coffins, or their, for their loved ones. It's a fascinating piece of history. It's lovely to see that the building is still here, although it's a shame that we can't go in. It's a shame that there's not really much left apart from this building. I hope it doesn't get knocked down. The London Necropolis Railway sign has gone from above the door. However, it's so easily recognisable that this was the place, and they really knew how to make buildings in those days. Just so elaborate, so beautiful. I mean, I can just imagine coming from under these arches. I can just imagine it. Yeah, very, very impressive. Even if you were not very rich, it would feel like you were really somewhere very special, I think, here.
Sir Richard Brown had chosen the site with care. Here, in the shadow of Waterloo, the mourners could be ushered away from the bustle of London, beyond the gaze of the curious, and into a world where every detail had been arranged for the final journey. The York Street station, as it was first known, was completed in October 1854 at a cost of £23,231, 14 shillings and 4 pence. It was an ingenious design for a difficult plot of land, rising in 3 stories to meet the level of the railway. On the ground floor, 2 large rooms served as a home for the station caretaker. Here too were a grand entrance hall and staircase for the better classes of funerals, and a more modest entrance for the cheapest. Between them, mortuaries occupied much of the space, silent, cool chambers where the dead were kept until departure. Above, the second floor held waiting rooms for second and third class mourners, along with toilets, a boardroom and the company's workshops. The top floor, level with the tracks, was reserved for first class. Here were 8 or 9 private reception rooms, quiet havens where families could gather before the train was called.
The Waterloo station was also the headquarters of the London Necropolis Company, and from there funerals could be meticulously arranged.
Coffins, floral tributes, masonry, even the sending of formal invitations. The letters would name the waiting room allocated to the mourners, the train's departure time, and when the party would return to London. The fare structure was fixed by the Act of 1852 and remarkably never changed in 85 years. 6 shillings for a first class return, 3 shillings 6pence for second class, 2 shillings for third. The dead travelled one way, first class at £1, second class at 5 shillings, third at half a crown. Religion too was a matter of strict division. Anglican and nonconformist mourners boarded at different ends of the train, bound for separate stations at Brookwood. Even in death, the lines between faiths were drawn as firmly as the tracks beneath the train.
Now there's loads of maps in the cemetery, so you sort of find out where you're going. This is showing us the Roman Catholic chapel, so I'll just read it to you. Cemetery Chapel, plot 124. The Roman Catholic chapel dedicated to the Holy Souls was designed by Cyril Tubbs and built in 1889 by Harris and Company for £759. The chapel was damaged by fire in 1989 and has since undergone extensive renovation works. It is now used for interdenominational services. Under the London Necropolis Company scheme, the funerals were not that much different in their arrangement than any other on a normal Victorian funeral.
The deceased might remain at home until every detail had been finalised. Then, on the appointed day, a procession of hearses and mourning carriages would set out, not for the cemetery gates, but for the company's private station at Westminster Bridge Road. If the service was to take place in a parish church, the cortège would stop there first before continuing on to the necropolis terminus. But for many, the main funeral rites would be held here at the station or at Brookwood itself. On arrival, mourners were guided into private waiting rooms, one party to each room, their names marked on cards fixed to the doors. The same names would appear on the compartments reserved for them in the train, ensuring that there was no unfortunate mix-ups. Outside in the paved drive, the coffin was taken from the hearse and placed on a lift that carried it up to the platform level. There, depending on the class of the funeral, relatives might be allowed to watch it being unloaded into the hearse van, or for the cheaper funerals, the process would take place out of sight.
The hearse vans themselves were divided into compartments by both class and religion.
For those adopting what the company called its reformed funeral, the coffin would be brought directly to the station in advance, resting either in one of the private mortuaries, the communal mortuary, or in grander cases, the station's own chapel of rest, which was at platform level.
When the departure time neared, each group of mourners was escorted to their particular carriage in turn.
In the earliest years, the Necropolis train left London at 11:35 on weekdays and 11:20 on Sundays, reaching the junction for Brookwood in just under an hour. For decades, the timetable varied by no more than 20 minutes, a precision the Victorians would have approved of. By 1898, the Undertaker's Journal noted that on an average day, between 30 and 70 coffins were booked as passengers, silent travellers unlikely to complain about the speed of the train.
Now there's lots of things in this book by J.M. Clark, The Brookwood Necropolis Railway. I will read you a little bit from the Undertaker's Journal, noted in 1898. Throughout every day in the year, the bodies are arriving at the station mortuary until when the coffin express is ready to start. There are from 30 to 70 corpses booked as passengers, for whom the railway journey with its fields and flowers and hedges en route presents no attractions. Passengers who are never likely to grumble at the speed of the train.
And so, with the living and the dead aboard, the train would pull away from Waterloo, bound for a place the Victorians called the Garden of Sleep.
The branch line curved first into the non-conformist grounds, ending at the North Station, and then it went on to the Anglican grounds, ending at the South Station. The train, of course, didn't pull directly up to the graveside. No, that was the job for something else.
At Necropolis Junction, the steam faded, and in the earliest years, the last leg of the journey was perhaps made by black horses. Their harnesses bristled with black ostrich plumes, their drivers and outriders robed in mourning black. Step by measured step, they drew the hearse vans away from the main line, past white painted gates and into the shadowed grounds of Brookwood.
Here, spread out across 2,000 acres of Surrey heathland, was the cemetery the Victorians believed would last for centuries. It would not, they said, be swallowed by London.
And this was no grim, grey churchyard. The London Necropolis Company had been careful to make it beautiful. One brochure boasted that no mere turfing has been allowed to blot out the rich purple of the native heather. In early summer, rhododendrons blazed between the trees, silver birches lifted their pale arms skyward, and Wellingtonias stood like sentries, keeping silent watch. In some corners, graves appeared almost by surprise, as if stumbled upon in a private park. It was the Garden of Sleep they promised, and they had kept their word. But even here, among the trees and the silence, there was life. Caretakers, chaplains and mourners gathering in the white-painted stations that stood together like gateways into the cemetery's heart.
There is a sign here at Brookwood Cemetery, which I will read to you. It says, "The Railway Walk." This raised embankment, flanked by giant redwood trees, was originally part of the railway line through Brookwood Cemetery. It was constructed to link Brookwood railway station to two stations and the stonemason's yard within the cemetery grounds. The station on this, the southern part of the cemetery, was for Anglican burials and was built on land which is now in the ownership of the St Edward Brotherhood. Associated with the station was a chapel and mortuary. A second station on the northern part of the cemetery, along with a chapel, served those wanting a non-Anglican burial. Funeral parties, including coffins, could travel to the cemetery from a terminus managed by the London Necropolis Company, next to Waterloo Station in London. Tickets for coffins were priced at £1 for first class to 2 shillings and sixpence, £12.5p for third class. During its busiest period from 1894 to 1903, over 2,000 bodies a year were transported by the railway. Trains ran daily, leaving London at 11:40 a.m. and returning by 3:30 p.m, giving mourners time to attend a funeral service and to have refreshments which were provided at the cemetery stations. The railway ceased operation in 1941 following the destruction of the London Necropolis station in the London Blitz. So from what I can gather, this would have been the line that the train would have come down, because I believe they've called this Railway Avenue. Now, as I may have mentioned before, the train didn't obviously always stop directly by the graveside. So the theory is that they would have then got a hearse, like a carriage, pulled by black horses with black plumes of ostrich feather. Very Victorian. The Victorians loved to make very, very grand funerals. It was a symbol of how much they loved the person that had passed. But yeah, this feels very strange. Coming down where the actual train would have passed. We've got a grave there that's falling. Very sad. Now, I've read in the book that the north and south stations, they were said to mirror one another. They were low timber buildings, white painted with green guttering, and they were huddled around a small courtyard.
The open side faced the platform, sheltered by a deep overhang supported on curved iron brackets, once lengths of railway rail. Here, first-class waiting rooms, chaplains' rooms and caretakers' apartments sat alongside refreshment rooms, complete with marble counters and a licensed bar. Yes, a bar.
Now, few untoward incidents were reported. However, in January 1867, there was one. And what happened was the driver of the Necropolis train, he got drunk and he was not able to drive the train and all the passengers, the mourners, back to London. The fireman in the end had to drive the train and the driver was dismissed.
Funnily enough, the London Necropolis Company suggested a solution. The train crews should be provided with a modest lunch of beer, bread and cheese, a custom said to have lasted until the very end. What do you all think of that? Is it wise to give the driver beer to stop them getting too drunk, just insisting they're only allowed one pint? Well, they didn't have any problems afterwards, so it seemed to work. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you think of that story.
If you're here for a ghost story, because I'm sure some of you might expect there to be ghosts here at a place that was once famous for the Dead Train or the Corpse Express. The Victorians had lots of nicknames for the Necropolis Railway service. Then you're in for a treat, guys, because yes, there is a ghost story associated with this place. Just one that I could find, and I am going to share it with you now.
From 1948 to 1956, the old North Station was known as the North Bar, run by Mr. and Mrs. Dendy. There was no gas here, no electricity, only the wavering glow of oil lamps and the slow, steady heat of the range. In 1950, their son was married from the North Bar, and for 6 months he and his new wife stayed in a large room at one end of the building. It was here that the nights turned strange. He would wake suddenly, heart hammering, hair bristling, as though something was charging him with static. The darkness felt thick, suffocating, and he knew without question that someone was standing beside the bed. Not moving, not speaking, just there. Close enough that if he reached out, he might actually touch them. But he never did. And he kept it to himself. Until the day his wife met him after work, pale and shaken. She had been alone in their room when something in the atmosphere changed. She felt hopelessly like something was directly behind her, so close she could feel the weight of its gaze. She didn't dare look, she just dropped her tools and fled. At this point, his wife confessed that she too had been waking in the night with the sensation that someone was looming over their bed, watching them both in the dark. It was only then, as they pieced the stories together, that the truth came to light.
Now obviously this is the part of the ghost story where I make an explanation for you. That room where they slept, that room where they felt that presence, funnily enough, when they looked into it, it had been used as a temporary mortuary. It had been used for the American soldiers that were waiting there before they either got interred here at Brookwood or before they got sent back to America.
Brookwood is home to the largest Commonwealth war grave cemetery in all of Britain, a place where over 5,000 men and women are commemorated. Here lie those who served and died in the First and Second World Wars, their stories etched into stone among the trees of Surrey. The scale is extraordinary. Brookwood is not one single burial ground, but a patchwork of nations, each with its own section, its own markers of grief. Commonwealth graves lie alongside those of France, Belgium, Italy, Poland, Czechoslovakia and even the United States. Each enclave carries the character of its people, making the cemetery a global landscape of mourning. Among the avenues of white headstones, you'll find memorials not only to the fallen, but also to the missing, men whose bodies were never recovered, yet whose names endure in stone. There are dedicated memorial buildings too, the Canadian Records Building, gifted in 1946, and the Royal Air Force Shelter, which holds the registers of the dead. Walking here feels less like visiting a cemetery and more like entering a silent city of remembrance, where the shadow of 2 world wars linger heavy in the air. It's a solemn reminder that Brookwood is not just a Victorian garden of sleep, but also a vast military necropolis.
Just found this particular grave, and if it wasn't for the sign there that says notable grave, I would have walked straight past it. When you get to it, I've come to have a little look to see who it is, but there wasn't really much to see until I got a little bit closer. Now this is the grave, I don't know if you can see, this is the grave of Robert Knox, and this is a clue if you're not sure. If that name doesn't instantly ring a bell, the clue is anatomist. Now, if any of you have watched my video on the Burke and Hare murder case in Edinburgh, then you'll know exactly who Dr. Robert Knox is, because he was the anatomist that Burke and Hare sold those bodies to. He got away with it, and he escaped later on in life. He obviously must have ended up somewhere in London, and he's ended up here to pay his final days in Brookwood Cemetery. I'm not sure how I feel about this one, because obviously his victims didn't get this wonderful grave, did they? What do you think about Dr. Robert Knox, everybody? Let me know in the comments.
Scattered amongst Brookwood's winding paths are a number of notable graves, lives that once made headlines for brilliance, for tragedy or for scandal. There are Victoria Cross heroes here, and even Eleanor Marx, daughter of Karl Marx, whom we last saw in Highgate. The cemetery is so vast I couldn't possibly visit them all in this episode, but if you're a fan of visiting famous graves, Brookwood might just be a place you'll want to explore.
The Necropolis Railway carried the dead out of London for almost 90 years. It was a service that provided great comfort, I imagine, to some people that couldn't afford a nice burial service like this in the Garden of Sleep outside of London. But no line, however solemn its purpose, can last forever.
The decline was slow at first. Motor hearses were becoming common by the 1930s, and families began to favour the freedom of the open road over the fixed timetables of the Corpse Express. Funeral parties grew smaller. The vast cemetery, once imagined as London's only resting place, never came close to filling its 2,000 acres. And then came the war.
On the 16th and 17th of April 1941, during the Blitz, the London Necropolis Company terminus on Westminster Bridge Road was struck by German bombs.
The grand archway survived, but much of the station was left in ruins. The line into Brookwood too had suffered from neglect and wartime strain. A handful of funerals still made the journey. Coffins and mourners carried on ordinary trains to Brookwood's mainline station, but the dedicated service never returned. By 1947, the branch track had been lifted, the platforms left to the weather.
The London Necropolis Company itself, it continued to run Brookwood Cemetery. However, its morbid artery, the London Necropolis Railway, was gone forever.
For 87 years it had carried the dead from the heart of the city to their final resting place. Now its stations stood silent, waiting rooms empty, the timetable forever blank. And yet walk through Brookwood on a still afternoon, or pass beneath the shadowed archway on Westminster Bridge Road, and it is easy to imagine the hiss of steam, the toll of a distant bell, and a long funeral train waiting to depart one last time.
This concludes our journey into the Victorian world of death. Thank you to everybody for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Also, I've got a question for you. What do you think about a funeral train? Do you think it's quite a nice, quirky little idea? What if it meant that you could be buried somewhere nicer for a cheaper price? Would you be up for it then? Do you think they should try and bring the Necropolis Railway back into action? Let me know in the comments. Or do you think it's not very appropriate? I don't know. I'd quite like the idea, to be quite honest with you, but that's just my personal opinion. I want to know yours too. So that's enough for today's Victorian dark adventure. I will see you next Sunday for a brand new video. I've been Claire, this has been The Wanderlust Way. You've been amazing. See you very soon. Take care, bye.